All right. So I got a tripod borrowed. So we had left off talking about justice and your answers to the critical thinking challenge. I won't put that back up on the screen. Hopefully you can see that if you have a computer or laptop. So we did this group here. We started with you. You all were in a different group, is that right?
Yeah, we're different.
You're a different group. Do you have your answer?
Well, we got it sent to us this morning, like 20 minutes ago.
You got it sent to you this morning, so you want to look at it, is what you're telling me, before you actually have to present? I'm not sure how fair that is, but we'll go ahead and we'll start with this group.
We can make it work.
You went?
Yeah.
How many groups do we go through?
I think we might have been the last.
We were doing with that.
The only ones that went was this group. So is your group ready to go?
Are we?
Okay.
No. I don't even look at it.
Just read about the conclusion. That's what we found.
Here's the roll sheet.
Yeah, why don't we just read this?
Let's go.
And I told you that I would wait to close the Dropbox until after we finished, because you might want to revise your answer after you hear some of the other responses and after we talk about ethics and sales
Yeah,
and
that's what she
marketing.
wrote here. That's what she wrote.
Gotcha.
You guys ready?
Yeah.
All right. Remind me what your group name is.
Logical team players.
Logical team players. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Okay, so justice is the outcome of any action, whether it be good or bad. Knowing your audience can benefit in situations such as advertising and sales, because one should be aware of how there are various ways people or the audience would perceive a message. Something like humane commercials or Nike, or like celebrities or social media.
Okay. So you have your first example is what?
The humane commercials, I guess that's what Nikki wrote down.
Okay. The Humane Society commercials. Which one are you thinking about? Let's think about that. Which one comes to mind when you think about the Humane Society, the ASPCA?
I like the song.
Yeah.
So it's the Sarah McLachlan song. What's that song actually about? It's about drug overdose. Isn't that great? You know, it's a pretty song. It's a sad song, but it's about drug overdose. And so I always find that interesting when they use that as a way of, promoting humane actions towards animals. And they are enormously powerful commercials, aren't they? I mean, don't you want to donate to the Humane Society when you see little dogs shivering and shaking? I mean, I will tell you, I don't have children, so my horses, my dogs, my cats, and I have a squirrel are my children. And I love them. They're little humans with fur coats. I can assure you that I will shove any of you under the bus to save one of them. I suffer from slight dissociative. Huh?
The squirrel is inside of us.
She was inside. Yeah. We've had her since she fell out of a tree when she was really, really little. She had no fur. She was probably about 8 or 9 days old when we got her. And so we've had her. This is the fourth and fifth squirrel that we've rehabbed. It's the only one that I've not been able to release back into the wild because she has a condition called malocclusion where she sheds, their teeth grow throughout their life, and she sheds one of them, and so she can't make it in the wild. She can't actually crack nuts.
She uses a litter box or something?
She has a big cage, a big 4-story cage, and she goes down to the bottom one area in the cage, and we let her out a lot during the day. ads and she runs around and she's very entertaining. You can see her, I post pictures of her on my Facebook if you want to see what she looks like. She's highly, she knows 35 words, which is more than you will know on test day, I assure you. So, she's very entertaining, but yes, you see these ads and you want to help. And they are good at selling. I mean, they sell the idea that we should be nice to animals and that you should give to the ASPCA. Is that ethical? You use that as an example. Do you think it's an ethical example of selling?
Yes.
Yes,
Just
why?
tugging at people's heartstrings, but I don't see any moral or ethical issues with that.
Really? Well, how do you know whether a decision is rational or not, or irrational? What are the criterion for making? So what we want is we want for people, and we'll talk about this when we talk about consumer behavior, we want people to make rational choices. Now, what constitutes a rational choice? And we'll talk a lot more about this in terms of whether or not you can have low information rationality or sort of a higher order level of rationality. But what constitutes a rational choice with regard to making a decision to give up your money to something like the ASPCA or the Red Cross or St. Jude's or any of those kinds of things? Because I'm not sure that the commercials themselves are really that ethical. I think that the programs that they support may be enormously ethical, but the way in which we go about trying to influence and sell people on the idea that they should give is not necessarily ethical. So what would you think constitutes a rational choice? One that is a product of your free will. What do you think that is? No clue? Anybody have a clue as to what constitutes a rational choice?
Something in your mind that's justified as right, maybe?
Okay.
So it'd be
So
something
it's
that-
based on logic, some kind of logic.
It's
All
all
right.
relative to yourself as well. What I think is right might not be what you think is right. You think.
So you think it's subjective? That's maybe problematic. So you think it's subjective, but you do think that there's some logic involved, and that what else might be involved in a rational choice? I agree with you that logic is critical to making a rational choice. Being able to evaluate alternatives is critical to making a rational choice. I think a rational choice is predicated on three things. That the choice is one, knowing, two, voluntary, and three, intelligent. Those are the three criteria to making a rational choice. Now let's think about each of these. The first one is pretty easy. You know what you're doing. You're aware, you are conscious at the time that you make the choice. That you're somehow awake. Now, we may make choices without really fully knowing. So what does it mean to know? Well, it means that you have, and this may be problematic, it may be actually harder than we think, that you have some idea of what the possible or potential outcomes are going to be. Well, do we really know what the possible or potential outcomes of every action are? What you do today in here, in this class, may have far-reaching consequences that you never thought of. Again, going back to my example of if you get a degree in musical theater and they teach you how to flop around on stage and sing and dance and do all of those things, if that puts you into debt, you may not be thinking about the fact that you're going to be in debt for thousands of dollars for years to come. And you may not know that that debt is non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. What does that mean? You still have to pay it. I have seen cases in bankruptcy courts where there was one case that I remember very specifically. A woman she'd gone to college, she had a massive amount of debt, and she'd never graduated because she was severely bipolar with mixed emotional features and paranoid schizophrenic. And because her psychiatrist wouldn't certify and her psychologist wouldn't certify that she would never be able to work, in spite of the fact that she had been in and out of mental institutions since the time she was about 25 years old, mostly in mental institutions, but because they wouldn't say that she could never hold a job, they refused to discharge the debt in bankruptcy. Wow. Did you know that when you signed up for those student loans? Maybe not. So maybe knowing is more difficult than we think. What is voluntary? Well, that one's kind of easy, although maybe it's not again. Voluntary is I'm not standing there with the rubber hose beating you, saying, sign the contract. I used to teach criminal law and procedure. Why do you use a rubber hose? Why is it that in police states, like communist Russia, or the Soviet Union, what is the former Soviet Union, why do they use rubber hoses? It doesn't leave a mark. It's true. You take a big fat, soft covered book, whack upside the head. Doesn't leave a bruise. The things you learn in personal sales. Yeah. You've got the gun. Your brains or your signature will be on the contract. Well, if those things aren't present, then it's voluntary, I guess. Although the critical test here, and it may be harder than we think, the critical test with regard to voluntariness is the will overborne? Is the will overborne? Now if you start thinking about this, are we influencing you through things like fear that might motivate you to buy things because it overbears the will? If you are, for example, a cancer victim, and you see the ads for not ASPCA, but CTCA, Cancer Treatment Centers of America, you might not be making a voluntary choice in going there. I would submit to you that probably CTCA is not your best option. Like the Mayo Clinic is probably your best option, but you see the happy ads, and you see Peggy, who's watering her horse, and she says, I'm a survivor of pancreatic. Well, probably, Peggy, you're going to die. Almost nobody gets that. There are two types of pancreatic cancer. I have a cousin who is a MD, and he's a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, and his specialty is oncology, and he studies pancreatic cancer. And he thought when he went into this years and years and years ago, it's been 40 years since he's been in this field, that he would solve the problem of pancreatic cancer. Turns out they haven't really. Now, you may go into remission, but you're probably going to die from it. And is it really voluntary if you see all these happy, and you're just scared to death that you're going to leave your family? Are you really making a voluntary choice? Is the choice intelligent? Now, this one is really difficult if you think about it. Is it an intelligent choice? What constitutes an intelligent choice? You are aware, you have met the other two, and you know all of the possible options before you. So when you think about giving to the ASPCA or St. Jude's, these are the options. If you're going to give to ASPCA, there are other, the Humane Society of America, maybe a better deal to give to than the ASPCA. I don't know, but you know what the options are, and you evaluate them based on most people who give to charities. They want what out of that? Do they want it to go to things like, I can guarantee you that ad, that Sarah McLaughlin ad, in the arms of the angel cost millions of dollars to produce and run. So are you really giving your money, or is it going to produce more ads to generate more money? Things like that you should be aware of.
So you're saying
So-
the commercial is not.
I'm not sure that the commercial, I think that the things that the ASPCA does, that they actually do, I think are highly ethical. But the commercial itself, what does it play on? It plays on our sympathies and our pity. And these can be extremely powerful motivating factors. Fear and hope, for example, CTCA plays on fear, and they provide hope. And I'm not sure that they really provide that much hope. Okay, so you've got the Humane Society commercials with the ASPCA. What was the next one? Nike. Okay, what about the Nike?
On how to, how to use the most effective. But in our business communication class, we were talking about how some people were saying they should use a different platform for that, but they knew that if they used him, they would be getting attention.
So if they used, which player are you talking about? The Kaepernick commercial? So they knew if they used that they would create controversy. There is a theory out there that says the only bad press is no press. And so, if you create a controversy, that might sell,
Yeah.
right? I mean, now people are going out as a result of that. I've read several places, I think on CNN, that people are going out and they're burning their Nike shoes. Well, that seems like to be a rational and intelligent reaction. Burn those Nikes. Great, because you're gonna have to buy new ones. Okay, all right. What's the third one?
We're just saying like celebrities or people with social media,
Okay,
whatever you say
social
on there.
media.
Yeah.
And celebrity. For the first time in history, you can become a celebrity with no talent. Absolutely none. Why in the world are the Kardashians famous? Huh?
Because we're shallow.
They're a train wreck, right? I don't get it.
But they know how to manipulate everybody.
I guess, yes. I guess they're very effective at that. So one of the things that we see, and as we think about this in ethics and selling, social media, and one of the things that we will talk about in here is the power that social media can have in your prospecting. You can discover all kinds of things about people. And you should start thinking about yourself as a brand and what you put out there on social media. I am sometimes horrified. From time to time, it's happened less frequently. I started teaching when I was 22 years old. And so most of my students at the time that I started teaching here at UCO, we were a very non-traditional campus at that point in time. I was 29, and so I was a lot younger than most of my students. And so I've noticed this phenomenon. Students are far less likely to friend me on Facebook than they were even 10 years ago, when I guess I was a younger professor and more relatable to you. But from time to time, students will still send me a friend's request on Facebook. And I primarily have that account because I sort of want to be relevant, although Facebook is not really relevant to most of you anymore because what's happened to it. Oh, your parents are on it. And once your parents get on it, it's no longer cool. You got to find something else to get on. But you're on Facebook, and so I'll look at your pictures or whatever. I'm sort of horrified from time to time about like the pictures of students engaged in beer bong world championship at a frat house. Like maybe you should not post that. Perfectly legal, maybe funny, but I don't know. Okay, so what's your conclusion? So justice is predicated on outcomes. Is that what you said?
Justice is the act of giving each person what he or she deserves.
Deserves. Okay, that's good. This is called the deserts theory of justice. And Socrates deals with this in a book actually written by Plato, Socrates didn't write anything down. He didn't take notes. He walked around and asked really tough questions. And Plato follows him around and says he takes down what Socrates says, and it's verbatim. I don't think we should believe that. But Socrates deals with this in one of the interlocutors. This is in Republic. It's one of the most difficult for him to dispense with. They go through at the beginning of Republic, and if you want to read a great work, Republic is written sort of like a play, and so it's easy to read, unlike Aristotle. And one of the interlocutors says at the beginning of that, well, justice is the will of the stronger. So you're going to do certain things. If you think about this, this is the way the world actually works. You're going to do things in this classroom that you probably would rather not do. Like present your sales presentation, and it'll be in front of the class. And you'd probably rather, I mean, students tell me, I do not get this. They tell me that they would rather go to the dentist than stand up and engage in public speaking. There's a horrible fear of it. I wanted to be a country and western superstar, but I'm a tone deaf flat baritone, so I had to become a college professor instead. But I'm an egomaniac, which is why I broadcast all of my lectures. So I love to watch myself. Fascinating. My voice. You're going to do that. And why are you going to do it? Well, because if you want to pass this class, that's a major component, and you don't want to do it. Right? So that's the way the world really works. Why are you going to do it? Well, because ultimately I have some power. Not much, but I have some. Most of you don't want to fail this class. You want a good grade in this class. And so this idea of justice is the will of the stronger emerges. And Socrates dispenses with that fairly quickly. He says that may be what's actually going on, but that's not justice. That's power. And there's a difference between power and justice. The one that you all identify, this idea of deserts, that's harder for him to dispense with. This idea that justice is giving people what they deserve. And if you think about it in sales, we like this. We're very attracted to this idea. You give me money, I give you what? What you deserve. I give you what you paid for. If that's going to the movies or a dinner at Red Prime or whatever, I give you, and that's an attractive idea. You paid, you should get the steak at Red Prime. You paid for the ticket, you should see the movie. What can you think of an instance when that might not be true? Well, Socrates comes up with one where he says that may not work in every single instance. And what we want is we want the absolute concept of justice. What's this instance in which it doesn't work? Well, let's suppose that you have a gun. I have a concealed carry permit, by the way. I really think I should be allowed to carry on campus. I think we should have open carry. I think it would improve your attention span greatly. I'm being facetious, but I do have a concealed carry permit. You know, I mean, so you know this about me, and I like to shoot, trap and ski, and sporting clays. So you know you've got this new SKB shotgun. And you say, you really ought to try the shotgun. It's just fantastic. It's got an improved cylinder choke on it, and it's just great for shooting sporting clays. And I say, okay, so I borrow your gun, and I go out to Silverleaf in Guthrie, and I shoot sporting clays, and it's just fantastic. And when I come back to return the gun to you, you're very upset. Dr. Wirt Gray has given you an F in marketing management. Your eyes are spinning in opposite directions. I think maybe you've been hitting the wacky tobacco that's now legal in Oklahoma so that you can, try and calm down. It's not working. So you fueled up on whiskey as well. And you're talking about climbing the tower at Old North and taking her out. What?
That's a vivid picture.
Yeah. Should I give you the gun back? Probably not. But that's your due. That's your desserts. I mean, you own it. It's yours. It's your property. Socrates doesn't think I should give you the gun back. I'm not sure I should. But this is a very difficult one to deal with because generally, and in marketing, we have a tendency to think you get what you pay for. And you should get what you pay for. And most of the time, probably 90% of the time, that works. Doesn't it? Okay. All right. Very good. So let's see. The next team. Are you guys ready yet? Okay. We'll come back over here. Idea, the casserole sheet, where is it?
It's right here.
It's right back there. Hopefully it'll make its way. So, remind me what your team name is. Jam. Okay. What'd you come up with? What is justice?
That justice is being morally right in action.
Okay. What is morally right? And that sounds equally as abstract as justice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Moral righteousness.
We think that.
I was thinking that, it would be the standards that are set in a society.
Oh, okay. So you're thinking about rules, like the law?
Yeah. I mean,
Okay,
that's one of our
regulations.
examples too.
Okay. What are your examples?
So our first one was follow guidelines and legal laws.
Okay.
So we put justice is found in marketing by companies following legal guidelines and promoting. And that they could probably get around and find loopholes, but would that come back to being true justice in marketing?
Okay. What's your next one?
Second one would be respect for people's rights. If we define justice as being morally right, then justice can be found in marketing and places respect and honor human rights.
Okay. And they should, and they haven't always done that necessarily. I think I told you all in here, if I didn't, we're coming up on the second largest chocolate buying day in the United States. What day is that? It's Halloween. What's the first number one chocolate buying day? Actually, it's Easter. Worldwide, it's Easter. But so we're coming up on the second. A lot of that chocolate is not necessarily ethically sourced. They still use slave labor or near slave labor conditions to harvest the cocoa beans on the west coast of Africa. And so maybe that's, should you do that? I mean, it's kind of creepy, isn't it? How can you tell if your chocolate is ethically sourced? Well, you can look to see if it's either UTZ Good Inside certified, Rainforest Alliance are two ways of knowing whether or not your chocolate is ethically sourced. So I think respecting other people's rights, don't trample on them. I think that's a powerful idea. What else did you have?
And then we said justice is found in marketing when companies remain neutral in controversial debates. And as such, as a certain class.
Okay, so Nike should keep their mouth shut and not engage in the debate.
To me, I think it's Nike's. I think that's their ethical standards. I think they're just showing what their ethical. Not everybody has the same ethical standards. Everybody's different. I just believe they're.
All right. Did you have a comment on the Nike? All right. So, should companies remain neutral with regard to controversial issues? Why do you think maybe they should?
So I did bring self-performance overall.
It could, yeah. And ultimately, what you are doing is you're impacting. Nike is a publicly traded company, and if they engage in this kind of thing and it turns out that it's bad, well, it could hurt their investors.
In this case, it was the opposite. Actually, their stocks increased.
Okay. This is not without controversy. Milton Friedman, who's one of the preeminent economists of the 20th century, said that corporate social responsibility was a priori immoral. That corporations had no responsibility other than to make money. That was their responsibility, to increase shareholder wealth. And we generally say that, and you can actually sue if you have a publicly traded company or you're a shareholder even in a closely held company. You can sue in a derivative suit on behalf of the company, claiming that the officers and directors have basically engaged in waste. Now, it's really hard to prove that because generally speaking, most of the time, officers and directors are protected by what's called the BJR, the Business Judgment Rule, which is the idea that business is inherently risky. And so unless they are really engaging in excessive waste, we're not going to hold them responsible. So, but in theory, you can sue for that. And that would be an exercise of rights. What do you think about if the law itself is immoral? Since you said that it's morally right following the rules and regulations. What if the law itself is not moral? Can you think of an example when the law itself wasn't moral?
Like segregation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's the prime example. Yeah. After the Civil War, we get 3 amendments to the United States Constitution. The 13th Amendment, which frees the slaves. The 14th Amendment, which contains one of 2 due process clauses in the document. And the 15th Amendment, which guarantees free men the right to vote, not women. Women didn't get the right to vote until the 19th Amendment. But we get these 3 amendments after the Civil War. As a result of those amendments, the South comes up with very creative ways of maintaining a second-class status for the now freed men, and it's called segregation. And that occurred in the regulatory code as a result of a case called Plessy versus Ferguson, in which the United States Supreme Court said that it did not violate the due process or the equal protection clause to segregate the races so long as you provided equal services. Well, the services were never equal, were they? I mean, they weren't. But let's suppose that they were in every way, shape, and form equal. The same textbooks were used, the same quality of school building and materials, the teacher's salary were used exactly. Is it ever inherent? Can you ever achieve equality through segregation? Well, no, you can't. And Earl Warren said that when they overturned Brown versus the Board of Education, or when they overturned Plessy versus Ferguson and Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas in 1954. So it's inherently unequal. And that was the law. That was de jure the law. Now we still have what's called de facto, in many instances, segregation, and but not by law. But most of us would say, by law, that regulation was in itself problematic. Now it's not that the law is unimportant, but it's not mutually exclusive. So you have the law and you have ethics, and there is some overlap, and so we have to consider the law. But if the law itself is immoral, and there are parts of the law that have absolutely no moral import to them, right? Why is it that you don't run the stoplight at 2 a.m. when you know that nobody else is coming, there's nobody out there on the dirt road? Why is it you don't run the stop sign? Well, there's no moral import to running the stop sign or not, but you still, because it's what we call a malum prohibitum. It has no moral import, but it's what we do to have an organized society. So I think the law is certainly what you recognize that it's something important, but we have to think about maybe a broader application of morality. Okay, good. All right. So this row over here. Are you guys ready? You're ready. Okay. If you want to go though, since I said okay, you'll wait. Okay. All right, you guys. What's your group? Sharks.
I just thought like
Okay, go ahead. Shoot.
all right, so we got justice as the ethical perspective that sort of demonstrates the most just outcome. Justice in the marketing world has a lot of impact on moral standards in marketing. and the impact that it has on marketing based on perspective. The perspective that we chose to highlight is how it affects our marketing.
Okay, but we are a free market economy in which individuals can freely and voluntarily exchange goods and services.
Okay? So as long as you have the money and you can pay, that's okay. What about drugs? Drug manufacturers bring drugs to market and they charge a lot of money for them. Should they be able to do that with regard, I mean, if there are poor people out there that can benefit from the drug and they're dying? Let's take something that you all have lived with all of your life and think about this. You have never known a world in which HIV was not a problem. It's always been there. I remember a time when there was no HIV. In fact, I remember the first cases of it. They didn't call it HIV and they didn't call it AIDS at the time. Initially, they called it GRID, gay-related immune deficiency syndrome. And it was horrible for those people who got what later became known as HIV and AIDS in the 1980s. It was a death sentence if you contracted it. That's no longer true, is it? I mean, people have, how long has Magic Johnson lived with HIV? I mean, it's a long time, right? I mean, there are great drugs. In fact, the drugs have gotten so good that if they are effective for you and they do the blood test, you won't test positive. What?
Sorry.
What's that? You will test if there are some drugs that are so effective now, antivirals, that as I understand it, that you will, on a blood test, it will show negative.
Does that mean you don't have?
And that's what's called, it's called
You don't have
HIV positive undetectable.
So,
And in theory, and I'm not a medical doctor, but in theory, from what I have read, because one of my streams of research focuses on ethical marketing. I mean, well, a big portion of my ethical research focuses on ethical marketing. And so one of the things that I have read in looking at the research on this is that in theory, if you are undetectable, you will not transmit the disease. Now, I wouldn't want to hang my hat on that if it were, if it's my life, because I still think it's a scary disease. One of the things that's happening is among your generation, it's not seen as being a scary disease because you think you'll take a pill and it'll be okay. Now, the pills have enormous side effects. Now, my point to this is that if we think about this and the sales of those drugs, there are a lot of people that can't afford those drugs. Should they be denied access to those drugs because they can't afford them? Like, sorry, sucks to be you, but you're going to die.
depending on where you live.
Yeah.
It depends on how scarce
Yeah.
you
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the, this is one of my problems with the prosperity gospel, Joel Osteen, vapid theology. Like Joel, say it like you mean it. And then he goes into this whole thing about, God gives you what you need. Well, no, Joel, he doesn't. Like, why don't you come down with me to the Wynn's house and you tell the woman who's on her deathbed and has transmitted this to her child because she was thrown out of her home at 16 years of age. You don't need that drug, and neither does your kid. This God is teaching you a lesson. That is immorality of the most vicious sort. promoted by one of the nation's leading pastors. Is that justice? I don't think so. I mean, that's problematic. So the free market has what we call market failures. And we have to think about this when we have a market failure. Okay, so what's your next example? But generally speaking, by and large, we do think that the free market does provide a nice way of allocating resources. It's efficient, the efficient market hypothesis. Okay?
For another example, we had, in addition, we have the policies like the Equality Act in place
Okay?
that governs business diversity.
Okay?
And
The last one we have is the Federal Trade Commission Act prohibits unfair acts in the marketplace.
Okay.
Basically serves as a moral standard in marketing.
Okay, I like the FTC example because it does say things that you know. It's one of the reasons why in drug advertising we have truth in advertising, and they have to tell you what the major side effects are, and they do it in, I mean, if you listen to the side effects of drug ads, you might not want to take them, and then they have to list in the insert all of the known potential side effects. Does anybody actually read those? No, if you read it, you wouldn't take the drug. If you read the really fine small print, but they have to say what the major ones are, at least on the advertising. Like, Cymbalta, when added to your antidepressant, may make you happier, or it may make you suicidal. I'm thinking that's kind of important. Like, again, going back to the knowing, voluntarily, and intelligent, you might want to know that. And so I like the FTC example. I think that's a good example of how we attempt to use the law to import morality into things. And it's not necessarily a crime, right? The FTC doesn't necessarily say things are criminal, but you can be fined civilly if you engage in unethical marketing practice. So I think that's a good example. All right, good job. All right, what's your group name?
Sound sellers.
Silent sellers. All right.
Justice is defined as a behavior or treatment amongst each other that is deserving.
So among individuals, as what?
As deserving.
That was just so
Okay.
kind of like how you treat them.
Okay.
Treat them just like us.
So what would you say is sort of the short version of that?
Do you want to try maybe something?
Right. Okay. That's often referred to as the golden rule, and that works a lot of the time. I mean, it works, a lot of the time. Now, it may not work all of the time because, for example, I may want something done to me that you don't want done to you. Right? So, if I project my own feelings, that may not work. In the 1st century AD, the rabbinic scholar Hillel reversed it and made it a negative, and it works like 99% of the time. And he said, that which is hateful to yourself. So this pagan approaches the rabbi and says that he will convert to Judaism, which, by the way, we don't see converts, which is one of the reasons that my religion is like the smallest among the monotheistic religions of the world, because we don't proselytize. But this pagan approaches Hillel and says he'll convert to Judaism if the great man can teach him the entire Torah, or the Old Testament as the Christians call it, of the Bible while standing on one leg. And Hillel replies to him, that which is hateful to yourself, do not unto your fellow man. That is the whole of the Bible. The rest is but commentary. Go and learn it. Now that's a powerful piece of theological philosophy. And it works about 99% of the time. That which is hateful to yourself, do not unto your fellow. So that may be the minimum of foundation of morality. Okay? Your examples?
Our first example is, I did this in quotations, best choice. Some people will pick the advantage over the right thing. I know we've been talking about this for like the last 20 years, hit on similar basis, but it's like, when you think of justice, you think of the right thing that needs to be done, and a lot of people will overlook the right thing or pass it over because they're trying to create themselves an advantage, and it's just a human thing.
Colin Kaepernick situation, because a lot of the athletes, they come from a background that's, not fair. So it's like, would you want to kneel and lose all these advantages that comes with, playing the sport, to take your friends back home or do the right thing and lose all that or go back to that, and then, never say what's right. So it's like stuff like that.
So when you think about best choice, is there a difference between most preferred and preferred by most?
Yes.
Okay, what's the difference there?
I think it's just subjective to like what you're going to get out of it. Because some people will look at it from that perspective, and also like you will look at it yourself and see like how much heat am I going to get from this, or like am I just going to do status quo and just run with it?
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. What is most preferred? And we have a tendency, again, in this country, because we are a democracy, or we think we're a democracy. We're kind of light on democracy, by the way, but we pretend that we're a democracy. We're not really, because if we were really a democracy, who would have won the last presidential election? It would have been Hillary Clinton. She won by how many votes? The popular vote. A couple million? She won by 3 million. She won by 3 million votes. And yet a minority of the population, because they were in the right states, you can win the presidency with winning the 10 largest states, because to win the presidency, you have to win electors. And those are generally winner-take-all systems. So if you can win the 10 largest states and you take all of those electors, you can win the presidency without winning the popular vote. That has happened now 4 times in U.S. history. So in my mind, we're a little light on democracy, but we like this idea that we go vote and you respect the will of the voters and yada, yada, yada. Okay, well, that's all great. But the voters voted to approve the most liberal medical marijuana law in the nation in Oklahoma. Is that most preferred, or is it preferred by most? Opponents of medical marijuana will say that that may be popular right now, but it's enormously unsound public policy. Because as they pointed out in the ads, for those of you at the door, you can have 12 plants in your dorm room. You can have a little hydroponic organization in there. I don't know. I mean, I have a tendency to think that in the aggregate, maybe we make good choices, but maybe not all the time. All right, so best choice, what's your next one?
The second one is future goals. Salesperson meets sales goals. Ceiling is not proud. Has been justified.
Okay. So self-motivation and justice. Doing justice to your, I think that's okay. You can recognize that justice involves your own actions as well. And that's probably a good idea. All right, your third one?
Honesty. Marketers have to make their products sound as amazing as possible, but some don't live up to the hype that they're giving.
Okay, I think that's important. Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit about this when we talk about virtue ethics. Benjamin Franklin loved the saying. He had this, what was called Poor Richard's Almanac, and he produced it every year. I think they actually somebody's picked it up and still produces the Poor Richard's. I mean, he had all of these little sayings that he liked, and one of them was, honesty is the best policy, and I talk about this. We focus on the word honesty. Franklin put the emphasis not on honesty, but on policy. It pays off well. It pays good dividends, to be honest. And I think that's an important idea. All right. Anything else? Nope. All right. What do you conclude then?
Using all these points, we have come to the conclusion that justice is subjective. Some might find justice in something where others do not. This makes it difficult to challenge what is inherently just.
All right. Very good. Some good ideas there. One last group. Present.
We do not have any of our answers.
You don't have,
The guy that wrote them all down is absent.
totally absent. All
Totally
right.
absent. Must have slept in.
You should feed him with a wet noodle.
Yes, we already discussed it. That's exactly what we're gonna do.
Hang him out to dry. So. Why should we study these ideas, this idea of philosophy? Now, a lot of times students, when I do this lecture, they say things like, well, why are we studying philosophy in a sales class? Because this seems to be the most useless of disciplines, just sitting around thinking about these higher order things. And sales is fundamentally about learning skills that you can go out. But I think that you can get something beneficial out of this, what I call the long debate, as a salesperson, because it sharpens, if you think about these things really critically, it sharpens your mind and gets you to thinking about things that you may not have thought about before in a really clear way. So the highest degree, although my field of knowledge is marketing, the highest degree that you can get on a college campus is the PhD. And why is it the PhD? It's the Doctor of Philosophy. So even if you get a degree in marketing, we don't have for example, a DMS. It's not a Doctor of Marketing Science or a Doctor of Marketing Persuasion or something like that. It's a PhD. So the Doctor of Philosophy is the highest degree that we award on a college campus. And why should we study marketing? Well, it's an activity that focuses our thought, and I think salespeople should really think about this. As you go out and you start practicing the world of professional sales, really thinking about stuff and thinking about how this will apply to your ideas of customer lifetime value in your engagement with people is enormously important. You will learn some tools in here, particularly when we talk about social styles, for example, that will allow you to assess somebody and be able to appeal to them in ways that may allow you to manipulate them. And I think you have to think about these things when you do that, and whether or not you are allowing them to have a knowing, voluntary, and intelligent decision making. Now, in business-to-business marketing, it tends to be more rational and we see less problems with that. However, people are still susceptible and businesses are fundamentally run by people, even though they are, as an entity, a legal individual. Everybody laughed when Mitt Romney. They thought that he just said the dumbest thing ever, Mitt Romney on the campaign trail. Somebody was criticizing him over his views of corporations, and he said, corporations are people, my friend. And everybody just laughed. But that's true. I mean, it's true. Corporations are legal people. What does that mean? It means that they exist as a legal entity. They can be sued in their own right. They can own property in their own right. But obviously, they act through individuals. And so you have to think about how you're approaching these things. Now, generally, we think corporations are more rational than people. And so it applies less to the business-to-business market than it does to the business-to-consumer market. But you can still, because they are fundamentally made up of people, see how you can engage in these kinds of manipulations and maybe overbear the will. Philosophy attempts to answer three great questions that are relevant to all people and certainly relevant to sales. They're relevant to all societies, all academic disciplines. First of all is the question of knowledge. What is it we can know and how can we know it? And this is not trivial. It seems like it is. And the reason I think it's important for us to think about as salespeople is because a lot of what you think you know, maybe you don't. And a lot of you are going to go out, particularly, we've had a lot of success sending our students out to sell, to work in missionary sales jobs in the pharmaceutical industry, or to sell medical devices. That's been another one. And you can make a lot of money doing that. But what is it you can know and how can you know it? Well, what is this thing here? What is this? Really? Why is it a table?
Maybe it's this.
Okay. Well, the same materials make up this. Is that a table? Did you just said like the same? It's laminated. Look, it's laminated. It's probably made out of plywood under the laminate. I'm sure this is plywood. But the reason that it's laminated is because it's cheap plywood under there. It would be rough, and I'm sure that's the same thing here. There's some plastic here, there's plastic there, so why isn't it, you just told me it's the materials.
The shape.
Okay, so all tables are made of plywood, laminate, and then they're this shape. They're rectangular and narrow.
No.
It's what it's used for.
It's what it's used for. Okay,
Podium you're standing at, table you're sitting on.
all right. I could sit on it.
Sit on the table.
I could sit on it.
You can sit on a lot of things.
Yeah, does that make it a chair?
Whatever you want it to be.
It's whatever you want it to be.
But not, I mean, it could be a bed too.
I can stretch out there and take a little nap, which I might like to do. I'm tired. I've been up since 5 a.m. It's the reason I teach morning classes, because I get up at 5 a.m. every day. And I gotta be out of here by noon, because, it's nap time. So, it could be a bed. I think it's a desk. Because you're not really using it. A table is something you use to eat at, isn't it? So I think that's a desk.
So it's whatever you perceive it.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, this is the reason that these things, we really have to, and when you go out, one of the things that I want you to think about is when you go out to sell drugs or whatever it is, can you really know what you're selling? Let's think about, let's think about an ad like this. What is the big fibromyalgia ad? Or fibromyalgia, anybody remember? It's Lyrica, I think. I think that's right.
Diabetic nerve pain. These feet serve my country, carry the weight of a family, and walked a daughter down the aisle. But I couldn't bear my diabetic nerve pain any longer, so I talked to my doctor, and he prescribed Lyrica.
Nerve damage from diabetes causes diabetic nerve pain. Lyrica is FDA approved to treat this pain. Lyrica may cause serious allergic reactions or suicidal thoughts or actions. Tell your doctor right away if you have these new or worsening depression, or unusual changes in mood or behavior, or swelling, trouble breathing, rash, hives, blisters, muscle pain with fever, tired feeling, or blurry vision. Common side effects are dizziness, sleepiness, weight gain, and swelling of hands, legs, and feet. Don't drink alcohol while taking Lyrica. Don't drive or use machinery until you know how Lyrica affects you. Those who have had a drug or alcohol problem may be more likely to misuse Lyrica.
Now I have less diabetic nerve pain, and my biggest reason to walk calls me Grandpa.
Ask your doctor about Lyrica.
Isn't that sweet? Now let's think about Lyrica.
To most people, I look like most people. But on the inside, I feel chronic, widespread pain. Fibromyalgia may be invisible to others, but my pain is real. Fibromyalgia is thought to be caused by overactive nerves. Lyrica is proven to calm these nerves. I'm glad my doctor prescribed Lyrica. For some, Lyrica delivers effective relief for moderate to even severe fibromyalgia pain and improves function. Lyrica may cause serious allergic reactions, suicidal thoughts, or actions. Tell your doctor right away if you have these, new or worse depression, unusual changes in mood or behavior, swelling, trouble breathing, rash, hives, blisters, muscle pain with fever, tired feeling, or blurry vision. Common side effects: dizziness, sleepiness, weight gain, swelling of hands, legs, and feet. Don't drink alcohol while taking Lyrica. Don't drive or use machinery until you know how Lyrica affects you. Those who've had a drug or alcohol problem may be more likely to misuse Lyrica. With less pain, I can do more with my family. Talk to your doctor today. See if Lyrica can help.
Well, what the hell does it do? I mean, It seems to be a miracle drug. Diabetic nerve pain, Lyrica. Fibromyalgia, Lyrica. And notice what they said in these ads? Fibromyalgia is thought to be caused by overactive nerves. You don't know? Medicine is not a science, folks. It's an art. We don't know. We don't know. I'm always amazed at medical doctors and how arrogant they are. I can't tell you how many medical doctors, when I was practicing attorney, I took through bankruptcy because they thought they were really smart. They were stupid businessmen. I can't tell you how many of my friends who were doctors that were also pilots, I'm a pilot, crashed their planes and died.
Were they under like the influence?
No, it's because they think, like they think I'm a doctor and I know what I'm doing and I can fly through that rainstorm in spite of the fact that I'm not instrument rated. They all do this thing. They all go out and they get their private pilot's license and then they go out and they buy what's called, there's actually a plane that's called the Dr. Killer. It's a Beechcraft Bonanza because it's a they do their training in something like a 172 and it's, a fixed gear, slow little airplane and then they got to go fast. So they go buy a Beechcraft Bonanza because it goes fast and it's got retractable gear and it's got a variable pitch drop. And, all the bang and whistle and they just die. I can't tell you how many. I had 3 that I went through instrument training that have killed themselves because they think they know everything. Not science. Like they don't even know what the hell causes it. Maybe it's caused by maybe it's caused by you're crazy. I don't know. Right? Maybe we know. So this idea of what we can know is important. The question of conduct versus moral philosophy is obviously important in sales. And then the question of governance. And of course, as I indicated before, these 3 questions are interrelated. And with regard to the question of governance, it's not that the law is unimportant to our discussion of ethics. It is important. We have to consider the law, but it's not mutually exclusive, as I said before. So we've got ethics, we've got law, and there's some overlap here. But we have to think about these things. And so I think it's important that we think about these things. I'm about out of time. We will probably not have the first exam when it's scheduled. I'm going to have to push it back because we've got a little bit delayed here. But fear not, after we get through ethics, I can be like Sherman marching to Atlanta through some of the lesser material I'm not as interested in. This is the topic that I really love. If you'll just leave your things on the desk, I'll pick them up. If you didn't sign the roll sheet, be sure and come and sign it. It's right here.
So we don't have test on Thursday?
No, I don't think I'm going to get to it.